Well, good morning as we start our study of Jeremiah and Lamentations. This morning is just going to be kind of a introduction. I want to just go through kind of what the book is about, its background and context and all of that. And much of that is in the book. I really like these Bible textbooks. We've used some before. They're usually quite well done. This one seems to be as well. There's a lot of information, and then Lord willing, next week we will go over those 15 questions at the end. But this morning we're just going to kind of go over what the book is about. What does anybody remember about Jeremiah? Anybody remember what he's often called? Some type of prophet. Anybody remember that description? You know, his book is probably the most emotional of all the prophecies, and he's often called a weeping prophet because of how emotional he was. He was a person who would not, under any circumstances, compromise his faith. He wouldn't change his message to make people feel good. And that type of personality was persecuted. And we'll see that throughout the book, how he was persecuted for not compromising. People wanted him to compromise, but he never would do it. And I mean, from chapter 1 on, we're going to see that his heart just grieved over how his people had turned away from God. Because, you know, he prophesies about the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, and he knew that was coming. And he knew there was nothing to do about it, that it was going to come, period. And so he knew what lay ahead for the people. And so he was sad. He was emotional. He grieved. He suffered for what was going to happen to them. And probably the character of this book is probably more different than any of the other books of prophecy. It is very unique. He probably suffered more as a prophet than any of the others that we know about in the Old Testament. So, a few dates. He was born somewhere around 647 BC. And that was before Babylon started their plundering of Judah and Jerusalem and all that. His ministry started when he was about 20 years old. So about 627 BC. And he prophesied all the way through the end of all the kings of Judah. So it was a long time that he prophesied. So there were many, many Judean kings that he saw come and go during his time. We'll learn in the very first verse that Jeremiah was the son of Hilkiah, of the priests who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin. So he was the son of a priest. So no doubt he grew up with a father who taught him about God and about his word and about all of those things. So I'm sure he found and knew all about those things. This Anathoth is really close to Jerusalem. So he grew up and spent most of his life in Jerusalem or right around Jerusalem. He prophesied for at least 40 years. At least 40 years. So he prophesied until he was, at least 60 years old. These are the kings that were kings while he prophesied: Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. He was contemporary with Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Daniel, and Ezekiel. He was about the same age as Josiah, King Josiah. And so no doubt there were times maybe when those two were together, because they grew up in the same area, about the same age. And, you know, Josiah was known for his reforms. You know, it's possible that Jeremiah had something to do with that, since they would have been close and about the same time frame. This is what one writer says about Jeremiah, and it's really, really good. He's never weary of holding up the Jews' sins to the view of the people and its leaders, the corrupt priests, the false prophets, the godless kings and princes. This too he does amidst much trial, both from within and from without, and without seeing any fruit of his labors. So here's a guy that prophesied and worked and suffered, but never really saw any fruit from what he did. And so that was, you know, something that had to wear on him. Well, this light's not on. Wonder what happened. Nope. Yeah. The battery said it was charged when I got it. I don't know what's going on. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. We'll go with this one then and see how it stays. Okay. All right. So, he was extremely persecuted. He suffered. He grieved. He never again got to see any real good that came from his work. It was a very difficult 40 plus years for this man, and the stuff he suffered was awful. And toward the end, he was kidnapped. He was taken to Egypt, and he kind of just, his life just kind of ends in obscurity. Really don't know a whole lot about what happened to him. So his story and his life just kind of ends, and we don't know a whole lot about the end of it. So the book, though, if you look at the whole book of Jeremiah is really about God using Jeremiah to denounce Judah, you know, the southern tribe, about their turning to idols, about their immorality, all of that. And so Jeremiah knows what's going to happen, and it's been building for years. You know, God's people have been turning away from God for years and years and years. And Jeremiah, the book is about God saying, okay, enough's enough. I'm done with you. You're going into captivity. And they did not have a chance to repent. This was something that was going to happen to them, period. And the desire that we're going to see in this is that this captivity would cause them to turn away from idolatry. And idolatry was their primary sin as a nation. And that was the hope. And so, you know, we see throughout the book, when we're looking at all these different things that happen, we're going to see Jeremiah knowing what's going to happen, but feeling sorry for what's going to happen to the people. A lot of people are going to die. A lot of people are going to be taken into captivity. A lot of people are going to be left in terrible circumstances because Babylon is going to come in through King Nebuchadnezzar and wipe out the city of Jerusalem. You know, destroy the temple, burn the city. So people are going to be in awful shape. And Jeremiah knows this is going to happen. You know, thinking today that it's like, that the city of Springfield is going to be wiped out. Thousands of people are going to be killed. The city's going to be destroyed, burned. So many people are going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. See, that's the spot Jeremiah is in. He knows for a certainty that this is going to happen, and it's going to be a horrific time. Many people are going to die. Many people are going to be taken to captivity, and he can't keep it from happening. What he is trying to do is trying to get people to understand why it's going to happen. Why this is going to happen. And people don't like what he says. We're going to see that repeatedly. They do not like what he says. Jeremiah's message, especially through most of the book, is pretty dark. It's a pretty dark message. But it's what the people need to hear. You know, sometimes people need to hear that it's bad. All right? It's bad. But that happens. One of the things that we're going to read about, of course, is that God's Word was added to during this time. And that's a fascinating thing that we'll read about. Let's see. We know more about Jeremiah than any other single Old Testament prophet. We know more about the things that happened to him because a good part of the book of Jeremiah is about his personal experiences and the way that he, I guess we could say, preaches to the people is in some ways pretty unique. Some of the things that he does and goes through. We're going to see him, he's probably the most emotional prophet in the Old Testament. He gets very angry. He has very strong feelings. All right, very strong feelings. He gets very agitated at how immoral the people are living and how they've been turning to idols. He gets agitated. And I think we're going to see that there's a lesson for us. We should be agitated at how many people live, whether it's in our country or other countries or whatever. And he certainly did. And he probably lived through one of, if not the most difficult time in Israel's history. This was probably the very worst time. And he was one of the main prophets God chose to tell his people why this is happening, what's going to happen, that even though they're going into captivity, they'll be allowed to come back. And that's the one glimmer of hope that he gives to the people, is that there is a possibility that God will let them come back. And one of the difficult parts about Jeremiah, it is not written chronologically. I mean, he'll talk about a certain time period, then he may skip way ahead. And then he'll come way back. And then go way back ahead. So there's nothing chronological about it at all. And that makes it difficult sometimes to figure out some things. But there's prophecies about the fall of Jerusalem, especially. That's toward the end of the book. But there's prophecies during Josiah's reign. That tends to be more toward the early part of the book. And then prophecies during these other Judean kings. Something else that's important is the other countries at this time. You know, Assyria was the leading world leader that came in and captured the northern tribes of Israel. But by this time, Assyria is starting to lose power. And that has to do with some things that are going on. One of the things that happened, remember when those 185,000, 186,000 Assyrian soldiers were killed overnight? You know, an angel of the Lord came in and killed them. I mean, if you can imagine, I can't. 186,000 soldiers just dead overnight, and no one had any idea what killed them or how they were killed. And there in the morning, they're all dead. And of course, there's other stories about that as well. That's in 2 Kings somewhere. So that was Sennacherib's army, and he was getting ready to invade Jerusalem. And I think it was King Hezekiah that said to God, you know, prayed to God not to let that happen, and that's how God answered his prayer, was by killing that whole army, or at least a good chunk of it. So that's happening. And then, let's see, in about 612 BC, the Babylonians, Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar, they start in a war against Assyria. And also during this time, Egypt is really powerful. And we learn about one of the main princes of Egypt was Necho. And remember, he comes up through Jerusalem, or through Judea. And that's when Josiah, he's king, he comes out to meet him in battle, and that's when Josiah is killed. So we have Egypt being powerful. Assyria is pretty well gone. Babylon is getting very, very powerful. And then Babylon and Egypt come to a battle. That was at Carchemish, 605 BC. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Egyptian army. And not long after that is when the 70-year exile starts. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar starts after Egypt's army, and as he goes through Syria and then into Judah, a lot of Jews are taken captive. That's when Daniel, remember Daniel and some of the princes were taken captive. They were in the very first group to be taken captive to Babylon. Well, that's when Nebuchadnezzar is coming back from defeating Necho's army, going down south. He comes through Judea and takes Daniel and a number of those to Babylon. And so that's kind of the beginning of the 70-year exile, is when Daniel and them leave. And then later, the second group is when Ezekiel is taken captive. Ezekiel and those are not taken to the city of Babylon, but remember, they are taken to like a, I wouldn't call it a prison, but something like that by the river Kibar. And that's when Ezekiel and all of those, that's where they end up. So we've got Daniel and other princes in Babylon, and then we have Ezekiel and a bunch of other captives by the river Kibar. But then Jeremiah and most of the poor people stay in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem. So we have like three different groups of God's people scattered different areas. Babylon, river Kibar, and a bunch still stays in Jerusalem. And finally, 587 BC, of course, is the big year. That's when Nebuchadnezzar completely laid siege against Jerusalem, and that's when he destroys the city, destroys the temple, burns it all down. All of that's done. And that's when Jeremiah and the poor people are left in Jerusalem. And the only way, and we kind of studied this a little bit, I don't know, a year or two ago, the only way the Jews get to return is because Persia, under Cyrus, becomes the world leader. They destroy the Babylonians, and so Cyrus and the Persians allow God's people to return to Jerusalem after that 70 years. And so all of that is happening while Jeremiah is alive, and a lot of it while he's prophesying. So enormous world events take place while we, are reading Jeremiah. All kinds of things are happening, between Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, and then later with Persia. So all of those things are taking place. So we've got maybe 10 minutes left, so let's look at the very beginning of Jeremiah. Or we can, let's see if we've got any, let's look at these answers on page 8. Maybe you can write some things down as we go, page 8 in our book. Why was Jeremiah so unpopular with the people of his day?
He told them they had to repent.
Yeah.
They were wrong, and that's what nobody wants to hear.
Nobody wants to hear it, but that's exactly what he told them. He also tells them Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, this magnificent city and this beautiful temple that had been built by Solomon. It's all going to be destroyed. And of course, between telling them to repent and Jerusalem being destroyed, that was like the two things that people hated to hear. And so he was unpopular for the entire 40 years that he prophesied. There was no golden period for Jeremiah at all. It was all difficult for 40 plus years. Okay, we kind of already talked about this, but why do some call Jeremiah the weeping prophet?
I was reading the introduction. He was totally alone, so he didn't have anyone to lean on. God told him not to marry, and then his family turned against him, and he probably really loved the people that he was telling them that they had done wrong, but yet he loved the Lord more.
That's right.
And so he was torn.
Yeah, he was very, very much alone. He didn't have that person he could turn to help and talk about how difficult things were. There just wasn't anybody. There wasn't anybody at all. So, no wonder he was called the weeping prophet. With everything he had to go through, he certainly had the most difficult time of any prophet. So, number 3, who or what was the danger from the north that Jeremiah spoke of so often? In a lot of his prophecies, he would talk about those from the north are going to come down. Babylon, that's right. Yeah, Babylon. So the people that he was prophesying to, he had told them not only what was going to happen, but who was going to do it. Okay, there are many prophets in Judah. How would you characterize their work? There's a whole chapter that we'll kind of talk about this.
There's a lot of false prophets.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of false prophets. Because the false prophets, kind of like today, were saying everything's going to be good. Peace, peace.
And Jeremiah's wrong.
And Jeremiah's wrong. That's exactly right. Don't listen to this guy. He's crazy. Doesn't have any idea what's going on. Don't listen to a word he says. Yeah, and that was what most of the prophets were saying. Yeah. And of course the kings, like the false prophets, they wanted to hear that everything is good and there's going to be peace, there's not going to be any captivity. You know, that's what they wanted to hear. Okay. Jeremiah worked at the time of several kings. How would you characterize these kings?
Zedekiah and is it Jehoiakim?
Yeah, there's a Jehoiakim and a Jehoiakim. Yeah.
They were wicked.
Wicked. That's the word I wrote down too. Wicked. And they treated Jeremiah terribly. I mean, as bad as they could possibly treat him. We'll see as we go through, you know, he was put in shackles, put in prison, thrown in a cistern in the ground, kidnapped. So, okay, 6, besides the exile in Babylon, what other great events were promised by Jeremiah? We kind of already mentioned these too. Yeah, Jerusalem would fall, but that, hopefully, it would be rebuilt too. Same way with the temple. And of course the temple was rebuilt, but it was nothing like the original. Remember some of the people that saw the original wept when they saw the new one? I think Nehemiah talks about that in his book. So in addition to preaching to the people, what other means of teaching did Jeremiah employ? This is some of the interesting things that he did that was very different than the other prophets. Anybody remember any of them? We'll talk about them as we go through the book, but he used a lot of symbolism, symbolic actions. He would do things that would symbolize something that was going to happen to the people. And that's how he got the message across to them. So we'll read about those as we go through the book. Some of them are very unique ways of getting across this point.
Kind of like, using parables?
Oh, yeah. Yep. That's right. So, many different ways of teaching. And then on 8, discuss the family situation. Well, as Jeanette said, he never married, all right, and his family turned against him, all right. And, of course, we know that happens all the time. Okay, some of the hardships that Jeremiah faced as a prophet. We mentioned he was put in prison, was thrown in a cistern, he was shackled. Of course, people humiliated him over and over and over again. And then finally he was kidnapped, taken to Egypt. So all kinds of things happened to Jeremiah. And you know, he never really got, during that whole 4 years, he never really got any relief. I mean, it was just, you know, a lot of the prophets in the Old Testament, there was good and bad times during their prophecy. I mean, for Jeremiah, it was pretty well 4 years of bad.
But he didn't quit.
But he never quit. Never quit. Never compromised.
That's a big lesson right there.
So, number 10. After the fall of Jerusalem, what did Jeremiah do? Anybody remember? Well, we kind of mentioned this. He kept on preaching. Yeah, he didn't stop preaching. A lot of the people were gone, many dead, but especially the remnant that was left there, he continued to preach to them. Those that were left in Judea, in that area, even though Jerusalem, the town itself, was gone, the people that still lived in the area, the Jewish people, he still continued to preach to them. Why did Jeremiah include in his book a large section devoted to the nations?
Says that that demonstrated that God of Israel is also the all-powerful God of the nations.
That's right. He's not just the God of Israel. He rules every nation. I mean, he rules Moab and Ammon, and he rules all the nations, and Egypt, and every single one of them. You know, it's pointed out that God is the one that sent Babylon. God is the one that sent King Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the city. It was God that did it. And what did Jeremiah preach concerning the hope of Israel? He said that somebody was coming someday. The Messiah. He said the Messiah was going to come someday. Yeah, it would be, way in the future, but the Messiah was going to come. And he would bring mercy and grace and peace. And what did Jeremiah preach concerning the hope of the nations?
Probably that they all repent
He said that there was this promise that one day there would be healing and restoration, but it would come from the Messiah. So considering, this took place in about 600 years before the Messiah, so that was still a long ways in the future before real peace and restoration would occur. They would get to come back to Jerusalem, but the Messiah wasn't going to come for centuries. So 14, are there two hopes, one for Israel and another one for the Gentiles? No, there's only one hope. Those 7 ones that Paul talks about in Ephesians. There's one Lord, one hope, one faith, one baptism. Just one hope for everybody. Because Jesus, again talks about in Ephesians how he broke down the middle wall of separation between Jews and Gentiles. And that one hope, of course, is Jesus Christ himself. He was the one hope. All right, well, our time is up. That was worked out well. So we will really start looking and reading in the text next week. There's a lot more questions in next week's if you've looked than there were in this one's, but try and have a chance to go through, especially the first 2 chapters. And there's 20-some questions, and we'll look at those, Lord willing, next week.